It's the weekend and you have financial questions that need answering. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome. It's Jill on Money. It is the last weekend before Christmas. It's smack dab in the middle of Hanukkah. So if you're out and about and searching for your gifts, welcome. If you're listening to us after you got back and you've got a nice amber liquor in your hands, welcome. And if you are listening at any other time, welcome. Remember, this show, which you're listening to on your favorite radio station wherever you live, is also available after the airing. And we put it online because Mark is the best producer in the world. Mark, are you excited for your baby's first Christmas? Are you? What plans will there be? Will there be a visit to Santa Claus or not? Too young. So how old do you have to be to do I saw Santa recently. Santa seemed to be quite busy. I don't know. There is a creepiness factor of having a little kid sit on Santa's lap. That's just me. But I don't know. I'm the Jewish girl, so we never went to see Santa. Are there big plans in your family? Are you trying to figure out how to duck and run and take cover during the holidays? Take some time for yourself. Go out for a walk. That's what I find to be the best thing. It's a wonderful thing about having dogs. When you go to any sort of holiday event and you have dogs, you can just, dog's got to go out. Or you go out. Just take a walk and be with your family, but take some time for yourself too. All right, this is the show that takes the mystery out of your financial life. We can do that if you send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. And you know, Mark, it is interesting that the end of the year, although everyone's caught up in the holidays, everyone's going to get those year-end statements. And you know we're going to get just absolutely blasted with mail right after the first of the year because people are going to get those statements and say like, oh, it's good, it's bad, it's otherwise. Been a very good year for stocks. And it's even been a good year for bonds because bond prices started lower this year and now have crept up. So let's go and take a call. It is Mary from Colorado who actually has a question about bonds. Hello, Mary. Welcome to the show. What can I do for you?
Hi, Jill. Yes, thank you. I had some, my family's investments analyzed by a manager, and one of their recommendations was that I have a huge amount of cash, and they said you should increase your bonds. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to buy bonds, but I understand how to buy stocks and buy mutual funds and things like that. But the bond market is confusing to me. I don't know when to go in. They make it much more mysterious than mine. It's not transparent.
I totally understand that. We actually, Mark, we have to do another bond boot camp because we get this question all the time. So, Mary, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about how bonds could or could not be part of that portfolio. So, first of all, let's start with the basics. How old are you?
I am 62.
Okay. Are you single, married, partnered?
Married.
Okay. And is this money that you have in a joint account, an individual account, a retirement account? Where is the money?
The money is in a lot of different places. There's some savings accounts. There's some cash that are sitting inside SEP accounts and Roth IRAs and things like that. So
Got it.
It's sort of sprinkled around in a bunch of different investments. When I didn't know what to invest in, I just let it sit and accumulate cash.
Okay. And are you guys still working?
I do a little part-time. My husband is retired.
Okay. What do you do for income? Because do you is he older? Is he claiming Social Security? Is there a pension?
He has Social Security.
Okay.
We have everything paid off. I take a little bit out of our investments as needed. Very small amounts, larger when we do big things like travel. Mm-hmm. But basically, since we have very low overhead, the majority of our stuff is paid by his Social Security once a month, and then we just take a little bit out here and there from investments.
That's great. When you say a
Yeah.
little bit, give me a ballpark, on a given year, but put some, the good stuff in. What do you need to be pulling out of your accounts? How much money approximately?
Probably, let's see, I probably take out for the year maybe 70,000 at most.
Okay.
No,
Got it.
maybe between 60 and 70,000 at most.
Okay, great. Now, let's do some math with you. Tell us how much money you have. Let's start with non-retirement accounts, so bank accounts or any investment account that's not, as you said, a SEP or a Roth. What's out there in terms of non-qualified assets?
Oh dear.
I know I'm asking hard questions, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't have that broken out that way.
But give me the total then. That's fine.
Total, we have probably about 1.6, I think.
Okay.
1.
Okay, that's good.
No, wait a minute. I'm saying that wrong. I think it's 2.6.
2.6 is better than 1.6. That's how you know I'm a professional. I know that. So,
Yeah. Sorry.
oh gosh,
No. Here, I'm sorry. I just got my summary thing. 1.8.
1.8. Okay, let's do this again. So you got 1.8 million in total assets. You're
Without the house.
Without the house, right? And let's let's use your 70,000 a year as even if it's not exact. And what we do is we take this 70,000 and we say, okay, what does that represent in terms of the total portfolio? In other words, I'm trying to figure out what is your withdrawal rate. And and I think that you're about right. I mean, for those of you guys who are listening, for every $1 million you save, you can take out 35,000 or so a year comfortably. So you've got 1.8. That kind of gets you there, and you don't do it every single year. So you're kind of right on target. I wouldn't do more than 70. Let me be clear about that. I certainly would not do more than 70 grand a year, unless there is some notion that there's going to be more money coming in. So when we get back with Miss Mary from Colorado, we are going to talk about the allocation in this total portfolio, and we're going to talk about what percentage should most people who are in this situation, retired, stable, need some money from the portfolio, so need to grow the portfolio, but you can't take so much risk that you are not sleeping at night, and you can't take so much risk so that if there's a huge market meltdown that you have you're facing a calamity. So when we return, we're going to talk allocation for this $1.8 million for Mary and her husband. There, we have a husband too. Mark, I really wanted it to be 2.6, so 1.8 is a little bit tighter. All right, if you've got a financial question like Mary, send us a note. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. And before the break, we were talking to Mary from Colorado. She and her husband are mostly retired. Mary works part-time. Her husband is claiming Social Security, 62 years old. And Mary says that they've got about $1.8 million saved up, which is a nice, tidy sum of money. Some of that money is in retirement assets, some in non-retirement assets. And they're drawing somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 a year from the total portfolio that's out there. And Mary, you said you went to go see a financial advisor. who is current? Is this as a person who is currently managing your money, or were you managing your money and you're starting fresh?
I am managing my money. This is a service provided by the company where a lot of my money sits.
Okay. Can you mind telling me what it is? Is this like a Schwab personal blah, 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 or one of those places?
Like that, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And
so they did a whole big, 40-page report.
oh my God.
Yeah.
That's
so
that's
they
about
gave
that.
me a worksheet detail of, what my portfolio is and what I claim to want to be, and say this is where you are, this is where you want to be, and here are some of our recommendations.
I would like to just say one thing. 40 pages is about 37 more pages than anyone can actually absorb. All right. So you said that you had been thinking about bonds and that instead you've held cash. And I'm wondering why. So if you were, what is their suggestion about how much money needs to go into bonds? Like what, if you could give me general, like of the 1.8 million, what percentage would they say they'd want to see in bonds?
Well, currently I have like 800,000 plus in cash.
I see.
Which is really bad. I know.
It's not bad. Let's not make a judgment. We'd like to get it working better, you know, right? That's good, especially the cash that is sitting in the taxable accounts, because then you pay, then it's just like, oh, it's inflation erodes it, and then the interest is usually just eaten away. So,
and they recommended to move like 730,000 of that into U.S. investment grade fixed income.
Okay.
They said they said most of the cash, since I have a lot in stocks already. They said you have a huge deficit in bonds.
Right. So, would they suggest? And I mean, I guess you could do this yourself. Is that you could move? Maybe not. I don't know if I'd put 700. We want you to have some cash, right? So let me start from that point of view. I think that outside of a retirement account, you need to have some cash. And the cash amount you should have is probably, you know what? It's probably going to be $100,000, maybe $150,000. Because I think what would be nice for you guys is that you don't have to worry about pulling money out of the portfolio in the next couple of years if there is some sort of downturn. So I might keep, especially because it seems to me that you're fairly risk averse, that I might keep 1 to 2 years of those living expenses in cash. So $150,000. Now, the rest of the money, I think you could slowly rotate into an investment grade bond fund. And you don't have to do it all at once if that freaks you out. You could, because essentially, I'm sure that the moment you do it, then the bond market's going to work against you. But whenever you decide to do it, it would be great to rotate some of that money into a U.S. investment grade bond fund. And all that means is that you're going to get some interest. It's not going to be great because yields, the amount of money that corporations are paying on their bonds that are investment grade, the good stuff, they're pretty low. You're not going to get great interest rates. But what you're hoping for is that the bond portion of your portfolio will work slightly differently than the stock portion. Now, sometimes they all move in the same direction, but over time, it sort of zigs and zags somewhat differently. And those bond index funds will create interest that will be reinvested in the fund when you don't need it, or sit in a cash account if you do need it. So I think this is not a bad idea. You can execute it yourself. In other words, you don't need someone else to do it.
Right.
If you wanted to add some more risk, you would add bond funds that are essentially called high yield bond funds. Those are junk bonds. And those would provide a higher level of interest, but certainly much more risk. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you feel like you really want to keep some money locked down and safe, and you want to keep some of the money that's outside of these retirement accounts in a cash equivalent that's doing better, you could certainly say, hey, you know what? I'm going to put $50,000 in a 3-year CD and another 50 grand in a 2-year CD. You could build a little bit more interest for yourself rather than just sitting in a low interest bearing account. But I think the idea of putting a bond position in the portfolio would work well for you. And it is certainly, given your age, we need the portfolio to at least keep pace with inflation. So the stock portion of your portfolio will do that, but the bond portfolio should give you a little bit more consistent and better income than just sitting in cash.
Well, one of my questions to you is I've had the bond funds recommended as a vehicle. What about buying bonds directly, like muni bonds, or so that you don't pay that
interest
the expense with a bond fund?
So there's two pieces to it. One is that the bond fund will fluctuate, and it can sometimes be a little scary. I get that. But the muni bond will have interest that's not taxable to you. Now, I don't. If you would help me, does Colorado have a high state income tax?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So usually what would happen is that we'd look at municipal bonds for your taxable accounts if you're in a high tax state. Also, I think you're in a pretty low tax bracket. I can't imagine that you're in more than the 22% tax bracket between the two of you.
We're real low.
Yeah. So I wouldn't look at muni bonds. But buying bonds directly, here's the big downside. There are fees involved, and they're called markups, and they can be very murky. So in some respects, I think you're probably better off with just taking a boring old investment grade bond fund. Vanguard has a good one. Schwab will have one. T. Rowe Price will have one. Fidelity will have one. And to make sure that it is a index fund, which drives down the cost. Now, the one downside of a bond, an individual bond versus a bond fund, is that the share value of a bond fund can fluctuate. It can go down. The good news is that when it goes down and you receive an interest payment, if you reinvest the proceeds into the bond, you're buying shares at a lower price versus an individual bond where you don't really care about the price. You just hold on to it until it matures. But I think that in your situation where you're really investing for the next 30 years or so, the way to probably do this most efficiently is to use an investment grade index bond fund. If you want to add a little sizzle to it, you could put some small percentage into a high yield fund, and you could put some small percentage into an international bond fund. But they should always be index funds, and you should really be clear. If the only message you take away from this conversation is bonds are good, they are, that you have to be clear that they can fluctuate in value, and that your big controlling variable in this whole process is the amount of money you're withdrawing from the total portfolio. So every year that you can keep it closer to 60 rather than 70 is probably a better year for you. All right, Mary from Colorado, thank you so much for calling. Love talking to you. If you, like Mary, have some questions about your portfolio, you want to talk some bonds, why don't you give us a holler? Email us, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
If you've missed any part of the show or want to check out a past show, go to JillOnMoney.com for more great personal finance content.
All right, you're back. I love the middle of the hour. I'm in my groove right now. I got it going. I got to get some of these emails cleared out. It's too much. You guys are fantastic. If you do have a question, shoot us a note. Ask Jill@JillOnMoney.com. That's what Sandeep did. And he writes, I had a question regarding converting my annual IRA contribution to a Roth through a backdoor conversion. My salary exceeds the limits for me and my wife contributing to a Roth. We are not claiming any deduction for the IRA as I have a 401k in my office. Okay, here we go. Here's the issue. We both have regular, or he means traditional IRAs and Roth, and have both made traditional IRA and Roth contributions over the years. Now, okay, so now he's making more money. Can't do it, right? What do you do? Question, can I do a backdoor Roth for just the $7,000 contribution for 2019 and not pay any taxes? Or does the IRS look at the whole IRA pool for me and, you got it. This is the problem. No, you cannot cherry pick and just convert the money directly. So with a backdoor Roth, if you have existing traditional IRA accounts, it can get thorny. Here's an idea that you may want to consider. You may be able to take those, if you had, I don't know if they are traditional based and funded or if they came from IRA rollovers, but if they are IRA rollovers from previous employers, maybe you can move the money, right? You can move that money, that IRA, into your current plan. If they are already just plain old traditional Roths, maybe you start converting those. I don't know how much money is in all of these, but what I can tell you is that it might be before you start doing the back door, you'd probably want to convert what you have, and then you can start doing the back door. I know it's a pain in the neck, but that's probably the best thing to do. Jody wants to know, how do you invest HSA balances, health savings accounts? I want to keep it conservative, but I'd like a little return. I don't anticipate using the money for 5+ years. Love the show. You know, I would tell you that the HSA investments, it's not like Vanguard's opening the doors and letting people do that. There are limited options. So you're going to have to search around. I wouldn't do anything more than a balanced portfolio for an HSA. I do think that, it's true you don't think you're going to need the money for 5 years, but in case you did need it, you want to be a little bit more conservative. Maybe 60-40. That to me seems fine. That I don't think you need much more than that. All right. I'm just plowing through, Mark. Isn't that good? You feel getting to this place? Hey, another insurance question. I have a high deductible. This is from Devet. I have a high deductible health insurance plan. My husband is also covered by my plan. It's through my former employer. We're retired and 60 years old, and we'll have this plan until we reach 65. When I first got it, I made the mistake of not getting a health savings account. As a retiree, can I now use an HSA? Let me think about this. So your employer gives you the high deductible plan. It's paired with a health savings account, but you're not actively employed. I don't know. I think you're going to have to call the plan. I don't know the answer to that. Mark, do you know that? I'm thinking not also. I think you probably can't because you probably need to be claiming income, but call the workplace. See if there's some way that it could work. Probably not, though. That's a bummer. That's a big bummer. Use the whole power of the high deductible plan is pairing it with the health savings account. So you got to use that. Okay, here's Nancy wants some advice. I'm 72 years old. I've got a full-time job. Way to go, Nancy. And wants to retire. Unfortunately, I made some bad decisions, took money out of my house to start a business, which I had to close. I need some advice. I've got $100,000 in a savings account. I want to take it out and put it into a better or higher earning interest account. I can't take any risk. I've got another $100,000 in my 401k. I've got a home with a $178,000 mortgage, and I want to retire and move to Florida. I've got $1,400 a month in Social Security that would cover a mortgage in Florida. Monthly expenses, would like a part-time job. Okay, so here's the question. What can produce income for me? So here's the thing. You just need to go find some safe accounts where you can earn a little bit of money. And I know that you can find better interest at depositaccounts.com. You're right. You cannot afford to take any risk. I love the idea of downsizing, especially from a place like Connecticut that has high state income taxes to Florida with no state tax. Even though you say you don't really need the money, you may need the money. So, um, I think that once you retire, and you get down there, we can reassess. But for now, I'm not sure I would do too much. I think I would just keep it simple, get the move done, make sure you've got the money that you need to have to live down there. And then why don't you send me a note after that's completed and you're earning a little bit more interest with your money? And then we can figure out whether you need to take any further steps to maybe broadly allocate some of the money, not all of it. But that money, that 100 grand, is sacrosanct. Please do not touch it. No, not touch. All right. I'm going to get to this one. We know what? I got a bunch more questions. We're going to bang this out in this hour. We're going to get these done, Mark. I promise. All right. I don't want to promise too much. We're going to get a bunch of these done. You're listening to Jill on Money. If you have a financial question, you can either just go to our website, jillonmoney.com. There you can listen to past shows or maybe listen to the podcast, which is also called Jill on Money. And you can also check out our resource section. There's some good stuff there. A lot of people are going to want to start interviewing financial advisors after the first of the year. I know that always happens. We've got your questions to ask. We've got year-end money moves. We have tax advice coming up in the first quarter. It's all going to be right there. You might as well just bookmark it. JillOnMoney.com. We will be right back with more of your questions. Hang on.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, she's all over the place. Go to JillOnMoney.com to find it all. Now back to the show with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. It's time to plow through some of these emails. Thank you all for writing. I so appreciate it. The email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. All right, this is from Deb, who's an older single mom. She's 69 and she's got an 18-year-old. She adopted late. Okay. So she says, I make about 50 grand a year. My daughter is set financially for college, state school. She's going to have to pay the last 2 years of college. She's planning for that. She says, I'm thinking about putting money into a life insurance policy for her. What? 100 grand for 10 years? No way. No way. It's a waste. You're right. Your friends are right. The investments would be better. Do not buy life insurance. Thank you for the klaxon, Mark. No insurance. Do not do this. Absolutely not. Also, I want to know more about you. And you say you're more financially secure. You're 69. Like, how much money do you have? What are we doing here? You got to take care of yourself because we don't want to actually burden your daughter if we're not taking care of you. Tim writes, my significant other has multiple credit cards with tens of thousands of dollars on the balance. Her credit score is very good. Do you know why her credit score is good? She's got all those cards and keeps making those payments. She's considering bankruptcy. She's retired. Her income isn't enough to make all the payments. I'm suggesting she should first explore a reputable company to help her negotiate partial forgiveness. Blah, blah, blah. There's no reputable company to do this. I mean, yes, there are. But, don't do it. She can do it herself. If you want to negotiate, you're better off calling the actual credit card companies themselves and try to knock it out. But to be clear, she should also see a lawyer. And any debt forgiveness is going to work against her for her credit score and her history. That said, if she doesn't need credit, maybe she doesn't have to worry about it. But call the companies directly herself. That's what she should do. Here's a question from Ramji, who wants to know the best approach to preserving gains and protecting against incurring large losses. The best way to do that is to have a diversified portfolio and not mess around with it too much. So, unless you've got, like, you took a flyer, like a friend of mine called me yesterday. This is so funny. And he says to me, what I did was I sold my house and I didn't know what to do. And, I just threw the money in an index fund. He put 200 grand in an index fund. And all of a sudden he turned around and he goes, wow, that 200's worth 300. What should I do? And I said, well, are you comfortable having all that money in stocks? He said, not really. All right, then sell some of it. But for most other people, your regular investment accounts, it should be incredibly simple. A diversified portfolio, index funds, do a little year-end selling if it's a taxable account. Maybe you do a little bit of a reallocation or rebalancing a couple times a year, and don't mess around with it. Okay. Charlotte writes, I'm 60 years old. My husband is 61. We live in California. I stopped working after being laid off in 2008. My husband contributes the maximum to his 401k and Roth 401k at work. We're debt-free, no mortgage. My husband makes about $250 grand a year, salary, employee stock option, and bonus. We've got $4 million in 401k and IRA combined, $300 grand in non-IRA, and about $1.5 to $2 million in assets. I'm doing the math. It sounds good, right, Mark? $6.5 million bucks. 2 kids, 23 and 20. The 23-year-old is graduated, working and self-supporting. 20-year-old is a junior in college. We've got no 529 plan for her. She plans to go to a master's program. Questions. Can I open a Roth IRA and contribute to a regular IRA? No, you got to do one or the other. And you are, oh, wait, are you working? I guess you could do a non-working spouse IRA, but you probably make, I don't know, you might be on the cusp of making too much money. You definitely will be for a tax-deductible IRA. Maybe you just do a non-deductible IRA. I think that's what you have to do. All right. Is it too late to open a 529 for my junior in college for her master's program? No, it's not too late. But if you're going to do a master's, you get tax-free accumulation, so that's not so bad. Should my husband contribute an extra $6,000 to his 401k? If yes, how can I convince him? I would put the extra $6,000 into his Roth 401k and just tell him Jill said you have to do it, or get him on the phone with me. Can we or should we slowly convert some of the IRA to a Roth IRA? How much yearly? Can we do it ourselves, or should we get a financial planner? You could totally do it yourselves. You should only convert the amount that would keep you within your current tax bracket. That's what I would say. And you're going to have to pay the tax that's due. So don't forget that in order to do that, you have to suck up some of that money that's in the non-retirement portfolio. Don't go crazy with it. You can do a little bit, though. And the other time to really do it would be if he retires, like between the time that he retires and the time that he has to start taking mandatory required distributions. That might be a good time to try it. All right, good luck. I'll nudge him. I'm going to play a special thing for him, Mark. Nudging. All right, it's Jill on Money, and we are here answering your questions. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. And by the way, if you're looking at 529 plans, don't forget, you can do a little research, but if you got a state income tax deduction, be sure to use the direct plan through your state of residence. Okay, we'll be right back. You're back. We're broadcasting live here at the Jill on Money Show. It's live from the Capital One studios. Capital One, what's in your wallet? And to close out the hour, some more emails. How about that? Mark writes, what information do you need to advise me on how much to convert an IRA into a Roth IRA, an annuity IRA? Well, first, we want to know your age. We want to know how much money is in the annuity. We want to know if you have any other assets that you would be able to pay the tax bill with. In other words, we need more information. So maybe you should just come and be a caller. It's so much easier to do it that way. I can get everything done at once. Isn't that smart? Okay, more. Oh my gosh. Here we go. Marvin writes, just sold our lake house, and we've got about $235,000 to invest. We're 76 years old and not interested in risk. What do you recommend? If you are not interested in risk, Marvin, then know that you don't have a lot of options. Maybe you buy some CDs and you put in what's called a CD ladder, meaning that you pick a bunch of different CDs with different maturation dates. So a 1 year, a 3 year, a 5 year, a 7 year. If you need some help with that, you can go to depositaccounts.com. You can go to bankrate.com, any of these aggregation websites. That's what I would try to do. Byron and his wife have an index universal life insurance policy, $55,000 of cash value. We've been approached by the insurance company. Wait a second. We've been with them for about 12 years. We want to surrender it. The tax implications we discussed with our accountant, which is good. I was wondering if I'm able to move the money that was in this life insurance policy into a Roth IRA. Well, first of all, you can certainly move money into a Roth IRA if you are working, but you are limited to the Roth IRA limits, 2019. I don't know how old you are, but make sure you don't go over the limits. Okay, so that's it. $6,000 if you're under the age of 50, $7,000 total if you're over the age of 50. That's for both you and your wife. And don't forget, with a Roth, someone needs to have earned income. Okay, that is the end of the hour. We're coming back with more of your questions. It's Jill on Money. You got a question? Send an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
It's the weekend, and that can only mean one thing. You're listening to Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's hour number 2 of Jill on Money. We are broadcasting live from the Policy Genius studios. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy insurance. Just go to policygenius.com. All right. Now, Mark, because he's such a buzzkill, the weekend before Christmas and Hanukkah, has to give us a serious guest. Because what do you have to cram this down our throats for? Because he says it's important stuff. It is important stuff. We've got a very interesting guest. He's an economist. His name is Gale, William Gale. He's from the Brookings Institute. He wrote a book called Fiscal Therapy. You are going to hear a lot of stuff during the campaign in 2020 about the state of the financial condition of the United States. This would be an excellent primer of how you can listen to this and take certain messaging with a grain of salt. That said, it is a little wonky, but it's very easy to read, and the book is readable. So here is the beginning of my interview with Gale. I know you're going to tell me that there's a positive side to it, but really, the first half of the book is kind of scary.
The first half of the book lays out the two problems that I want to address in the book. One is rising federal debt, which will gradually eat away at our capital stock, and the other is lagging federal investment in key areas like investing in kids, investing in infrastructure, investing in science. And the reason the two are important to look at the same time is that solving the second issue by investing more makes the first issue worse by raising the level of debt.
Once and for all, give me a great, easy way to say the difference between the debt and the deficit.
The deficit is how much things get worse in a given year, or how much the government spends more than it raises in revenues. The debt is the total accumulated amount of deficits over time. So if you're talking about a credit card, the deficit is the amount you add to it in a given month. the debt is the total balance.
And that total balance is the one that's a little bit scary. As you say, right now, the federal debt is already higher as a share of the economy than at any other time in the nation's history.
Except for a couple years around the Second World War. Debt peaked in the early 1940s because of the massive military mobilization, but then we paid it down pretty quickly after that. What's interesting about the situation now is that the level of debt compared to GDP is already high, as point one, and point two, it's getting higher. There's no war that's going to end that will bring the debt to GDP ratio down. There's no recession that will end that will raise more revenue. So basically, we're already on a high debt spot. We're almost on autopilot to increase debt over time.
And what's amazing is that, of course, because of the demographic issue, we are not exactly set up to deal with this exploding debt, and there are no easy solutions. You outline three core themes. One is control entitlement spending. The second is invest in the future. And the third is raise and reform taxes. I want to talk about entitlement spending for a second, because I don't think that people really get when we talk about like, oh, all this spending. Most of this spending is mandated. It's not a discretionary thing that your congressperson is voting on. Explain what portion is of the national outstanding debt, not the deficit year to year. What portion of that is around entitlement spending?
It's hard to divvy that up exactly, but what I can tell you is that over the next 20, 30 years, Social Security and Medicare spending, increases in Social Security and Medicare spending will account for more than half of the total increase in debt over time.
And then also you said another 8% from net interest. So you have to pay interest on, like you got your credit card bill, and then you got to pay interest on it. So it's the entitlement programs and the interest, right?
That's correct. And those three programs, Social Security, health, and interest, will account for more than 100% of the increase in federal spending.
You go through a really interesting background about how we got to this place. And I think that it's also important. You're not saying that we should never have debt or that we need to be having a balanced budget, right?
Absolutely.
Because a part of a government is like you can have some money that's sitting on your balance sheet and saying like, oh, we owe this money.
Well, Alexander Hamilton taught us the virtues of having some debt. It would be silly for us to try to have zero debt. That would actually be a bad thing. The government uses debt to conduct monetary policy. It uses debt as a safe asset that investors around the world can put their money into. There's a variety of reasons we should have some debt. The concern is that if it becomes excessive and the costs of it become excessive, then we're headed down a path that's very difficult to get out of, in the same way that sometimes people have their credit card bills build up and then build up more and build up more.
You know, I think that a lot of people were sort of raising the red flag about debt. And then we have this massive amount of debt and the economy is still growing. So what is the problem with having this much debt? The Japanese have a bunch of debt and they got an aging population and they're still chugging along. What's the problem that the overwhelming amount of debt and the skyrocketing debt, what is it that could happen when that occurs?
Well, first, let's talk about what I think won't happen. I think we will not have a crisis the way, Argentina or Venezuela or other countries have had. We are the world's reserve currency. We are the safest place in the world to invest. So when people talk about a crisis that might happen, I think that's wrong in two ways. One, it's wrong substantively in that I don't think it's going to happen. We can pay our debts for decades to come. But two, implicitly, it emphasizes that the crisis is what we need to worry about. Although politicians could create a crisis, for example, by not raising the debt ceiling and causing us to default on our debt, although that could happen, I don't think that's the main concern. The main concern is what you were saying earlier, the deficit will gradually eat away the capital stock or force us to borrow more from overseas. And either way, it puts a mortgage, if you will, on our future income as a society. It's not a dramatic, one-time, oh my gosh, look what happened type of thing. It's much more of a gradual, quiet, behind-the-scenes set of events where the government borrows more. That either crowds out domestic investment or it makes us borrow funds from overseas.
What's wrong with borrowing from overseas?
There's nothing wrong with borrowing in the same way there's nothing wrong with debt. It's a question of whether things get out of balance, whether things become excessive.
And when would that happen? What's the tipping point for it getting out of balance in your mind?
Well, this is the tricky thing. There's no, as far as I can tell, there's no drop-dead moment. There's no moment where the economy stops functioning or people will pick up and take their money out. There's just a gradual change in supply and demand that'll be reflected in either interest rates or exchange rates. It's also a problem politically that there's no drop-dead moment.
Right, because why do anything?
Right, why do anything? Politicians typically don't act when they should. They act when they have to, especially on policies that might cause pain in terms of raising taxes or cutting spending.
Okay, we'll get back to Bill Gale in just a minute. You know what? During the break, why don't you go onto the website and very quickly just click on the link to buy my book, The Dumb Things Smart People Do With Their Money, 13 Ways to Right Your Financial Wrongs. Don't you want to start the year off on a positive foot? That's how you do it. Okay, we'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, send an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. You know, this past week, I was on CBS This Morning, and I did a segment about the disparity in retirement savings. And the question is, why is this happening? What has happened in the U.S. in the last couple of decades to make the disparity so dramatic? And it really does go back to this idea that retirement used to be a three-legged stool, which was your pension, your Social Security, and your savings. Well, as soon as the pensions got shifted over to 401ks, everyone focused a lot more on the Social Security part of it. And this entitlement program is just one of a number in the U.S. where we have pressures, demographic pressures. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of these programs suffer from a similar problem, which has to do with the way that we pay for them, the taxes associated with them, and frankly, who is working, who is retiring, and how long we're living. So I thought it was a good idea to kind of drill down about this with our guest, Bill Gale. His book is called Fiscal Therapy. Here's a little Entitlement 101. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of these entitlement programs and how we can restructure them to help us out. I've always felt like Social Security is a mathematics problem. There's a few different variables, right? There's the age that you can retire, the tax rate on your wage base, and then there's a wage base itself, right? So there's not that many variables in Social Security. What is the plan to fix Social Security that's already been laid out? Because there was a bipartisan committee that looked at this, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the game plan to fix Social Security? Well,
there's one more demographic moving part that I would add, and that's the relative size of different generations of the population. Commission you're referring to was one that was organized by the Bipartisan Policy Center a few years ago. I was a member of this commission, and one of the things we did was come up with a Social Security reform plan that does some obvious things and then some not obvious things. The obvious things were raise the retirement age, change the way inflation is measured, and raise the payroll tax cap.
Okay, let's just go back for a second. So Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. People who are working pay out benefits for the folks who are retired. When there are more people working than people who are retired, we build up a little kitty. And then when the equation flips and there are more people retired than people working, we dip into the kitty to help pay out the benefits. And by 2034, the year I turn 69, thank you very much, so maybe I will claim early, the trust fund's going to run out. The number of people working will only be able to pay out 3/4 of the benefits that are promised. And so there are a number of ways to make sure that we pay out what has been promised. And so you're not saying we should starve the beast and just pay out less in benefits. You're saying fix the system because Social Security is very popular, right?
Yeah, Social Security may well be the single most popular government initiative, and it deserves to be. It's done a tremendous job keeping people out of poverty, helping people who are survivors or who are disabled. The basic structure of the program is supported by the overwhelming majority of Americans, but as you mentioned, it's a pay-as-you-go system, and the first generation, the early generations got a significant amount of benefits, and those costs are being spread over the remaining generations.
So the raising of the payroll tax cap. So in 2019, right now, on the first $132,900, you pay FICA tax. You as an employee pay 6.2%. Your employer pays the other 6.2%. If you're self-employed, you get to, wow, what fun. You get to pay both sides of it. Okay, now, what's the downside? What's the pushback on raising the earnings cap?
Well, the earnings cap was set a long time ago, several decades ago, at a rate that would have it rise with average wages in the economy. And then since then, over the last several decades, wages at the top have risen much faster than wages on average. What's happened over time is the payroll tax cap covers smaller and smaller share of total wages in the economy. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking for revenues to help bolster the Social Security system, an obvious way to do it is to raise that payroll tax cap back to a level so that it covers the same proportion of total earnings as it did 20 or 30 years ago.
So what do you think that level is about right now?
I think it would have to go up to around $200,000.
So on the first $200,000. So obviously the people who are making like 180 are freaking out when they hear this because they say, oh my God, now they're going to tax me more. Is there any way to start the wage? So you have maybe a certain number of people who pay in and they don't pay anything, right? They're poor people and they really can't afford to pay any taxes. Is there any way to have it kick in later and almost be like, okay, if you're below 50 grand, you don't pay into it, but you get it. And then from 50 to 300, you have to pay taxes. Would that be anything possible or not?
Mathematically, you could design proposals like that. In practice, two things. One is it's really expensive to exempt the first 10, 20,000 because everybody earns the first 10, 20,000.
Right.
But the other thing to point out is the earned income credit was originally designed with exactly that purpose in mind. That is to offset the payroll tax that low-income households paid.
Okay, and you also say we should raise the payroll tax rate itself so that the proposal would raise, this is, again, going back to this bipartisan commission. So we say, okay, more of your money is going to get taxed. And then you're going to raise the payroll tax rate. So instead of having it be 12.4, it's going to go to 13.4 slowly. I think that's kind of seems like fine. Like to me, that seems like, oh, that's not going to hurt that much, especially if you do it slowly. But maybe there is pushback.
This is part of the non-obvious things. The obvious things were to raise the payroll tax, to raise retirement age, to fix the way it measures inflation. When you do those, you solve a lot of the problem, but you don't get all the way there. Mm-hmm. And we essentially did two more things to get all the way there. One is we chose to raise the payroll tax rate gradually over time, as you mentioned, by a total of 1 percentage point. We did a variety of things to take care of low-income and vulnerable populations, including widows and low-income households who maybe can't retire later because they've been involved in physical jobs and they need to retire.
Because you also say raise the full retirement age, which freaks people out. I'll tell you, like here in CBS, right? You got a guy who's carrying a camera around. He's not going to work till he's 70. Forget about it. So he's like, I have like a physical job and I can't do it. So how do we help these people who have blue-collar jobs or physical jobs who can't work till they're 70?
The reason to raise retirement age first is that lifespan for a big chunk of the population has been increasing. And just as a matter of sheer math, You can't work for 40 years and then finance a 30-year retirement. You just can't save enough to do that. And certainly Social Security can't. But if you do raise retirement age, then you need to pay special attention to groups that don't just sit behind a desk at their job, that have physical jobs. And we try to phase in benefit increases for those kind of groups.
It seems to me that Social Security is fixable. And I actually think that even like public policy-wise, politically, even though everyone hates it, there's a way to fix. There's a pathway. I don't get the healthcare reform is so easy. I feel like that is an explosive algorithmic problem, not just like an adding, subtraction problem. How do we tackle healthcare then?
I think your characterization is exactly right. You could write down a piece of legislation that solved the Social Security problem in one fell swoop. And you're exactly right about healthcare reform. Healthcare reform is more of a process than an event because it depends on millions and millions of decisions that doctors and patients and hospitals make. What we need to do is give people, meaning patients and doctors and hospitals, the information that they need, but also the incentives that they need to make good choices.
We'll get back to our interview with Bill Gale in just a minute. You know, during the break, it might be helpful if you want to send us a question about your retirement planning and maybe your questions about entitlements in general and these programs. Shoot us a note. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Do I invest here? Should I put my money there? Jill Schlesinger can help you. Back to Jill on Money.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. If you've got a question, could be about your retirement, could be about your investing, could be about your college funding, could even be about your career, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. That's askjill@jillonmoney.com. Hey, some of you wondering about this other Jill on Money show. It's known as our podcast. And if you don't know how to use a podcast yet, it's very easy. For those of you who have iPhones, there's even a little app that can help you out. What is a podcast? Everyone always asks this to me. Like my mom is constantly saying to me, like, I don't understand it. I can explain it to her 12 times. Mark, do your parents listen to the pod? So Mark's parents can't figure it out either, and they're younger than my mother. But anyway, it's as if you had a way to tap into all this audio content and you listen to it whenever you want. So you're listening to us, here you are, you're listening to us on the radio. Let's say you have to get out and do something and you miss part of the show. Well, you know, you could go back and listen to our whole show. We posted on the website at jillonmoney.com. But you could also subscribe to our podcast. It's called Jill on Money. Anyway, you can get Jill on Money at Apple, Stitcher, Radio.com, Google Play, anywhere else you find your favorite podcast. And now, let's go back to our interview with Bill Gale. He's going to fix these entitlement programs. All right. Now, part of your core themes, this is a winner. We need to raise and reform taxes. Nice. Let me read from Chapter 11, ladies and gentlemen. To address the fiscal challenge that our author, Bill Gale, has outlined, he says, quote, we need to raise taxes substantially. So let's talk a little bit here. Obviously, we have a tax system that is progressive, meaning as you make more money, you pay higher taxes. What has to happen with the tax code? I mean, we just had a big, huge tax overhaul. I presume, and you write this in the book, that basically the 2017 tax bill, you want to just rip that up. You don't like that.
Right. Well, one of the luxuries of not running for office and instead writing books is that you can say what you think is right and hope to frame the debate that way rather than saying necessarily what people want to hear. The basic arithmetic is pretty overwhelming that if we want to rein in the debt, we can do some on the spending side, no question, but there's no alternative to raising taxes, which will have to be part of the solution. I think the 2017 Tax Act was the wrong thing at the wrong time. It was a wrong thing in a number of ways. It was mainly went to high-income households. It did not address a number of problems in the structure of the tax system, and it cost a lot of money.
And by the way, totally confusing. Like,
Yes.
it made it more complicated.
In some ways, it made it simpler. In some ways, it made it complicated. Anytime you change a massive thing like the U.S. tax system, it's complicated for a while, at least until people get to know the new system.
All right, I just want to read one stat that I highlighted. More than 90% of the tax benefits from long-term capital gains tax rates went to households in the top 20% of income, meaning that the capital gains, long-term capital gains rates are lower for many people than their marginal tax rate. It used to be that capital gains were taxed at your marginal tax bracket a long time ago, way back when, right?
There was a short period in 1986 to 1990 where we taxed capital gains and other income at the same rate.
So now it's 20% plus that weird 3.8% extra thing. You say capital gains rate has to go up to a top rate at 24.2%. You want it to go up to basically 28% total. What about the brackets? Do we go back to a higher rate? Do you think that we need a rate above $600,000 for married people that goes like, do we step it up more? Like, what about the billionaires? Should they pay 50% or 60%? Or like my grandfather said, I used to pay 90%, which I guess for a period of time he did.
If he did, he was one of the few people who did.
Yeah, well, maybe he said he did before his loopholes.
The first thing we need to do in capital gains is end the biggest loophole in the tax system, which is that capital gains upon death are forgiven.
Yes.
And there's no reason to do that. There's a lot of money being lost there directly because we're not claiming the capital gains taxes on assets that people hold till death. And there's a lot of money being lost to tax avoidance because people know that if they hold the asset till death, they won't pay taxes. So they structure their transactions in ways to get to that point. So
How would you feel if we got rid of, let me give you like my back of the envelope plan. Tell me if I get there with this plan. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
So we have incremental. We go to a highest bracket of 50%. And, so we'll have, let's say 600 to $1 million, and then we're going to go $1 million to $1.5 million. And I want to scale it up. Then I totally agree. Capital gains rate go back to 28%. Dividends, everything gets taxed. Abolish all deductions. They're done. Nobody gets a deduction on anything. You liking this so far? I'm really talking. I'm not getting elected on this.
Generally, I like the idea of trimming deductions. I don't think that all deductions should disappear. In particular, I think the charitable contributions deductions should stay. But it is important.
But that's only for. Wait a second. Can I push back?
Sure.
Okay, but that's for rich people, right? And you think rich people won't give money away unless they're itemizers? And I guess we'll see in the next few years, right? Because some people didn't give. But do you really think that we need that deduction, that people would be less charitable if they didn't get the deduction?
I think that if somebody gives away all their money, all their income, they shouldn't have to pay taxes. The reason people don't agree with that often is because of the definition of income and the definition of the charitable contribution. Like, I don't really favor getting football tickets on the 50-yard line in exchange for a contribution to the athletic department. I don't really think of that as a
right.
charitable contribution.
Well, you're getting something of value.
So
in
I would
return.
I would like to tighten up the definition of what it means to be a real charitable contribution. But I do feel like if somebody makes a real charitable contribution in our society, which has emphasized private philanthropy over, say, what European countries do.
Right.
I do feel like it's appropriate to give them a tax.
Okay,
deduction.
can I give away highly appreciated securities and still get the tax deduction or not?
So that's a capital gains issue, not a charity. As long as the income is declared and then they give it away, I think that's okay.
What if I gift it into my Fidelity charitable account, which I have? I get the deduction of the gift into the account, and now I just give it away. So I get
Right.
just one deduction.
In my view, these are not charitable contribution issues. These are
Capital gains.
taxation of capital gains
All
issues.
right. I'm with you. Okay. You convinced me. Let's keep charity.
Okay.
Thanks so much to Bill Gale. We're going to link to his book. It's called Fiscal Therapy. And if you want to read more about the stuff he does, he's over at the Brookings Institute. When we return, we're going to get right into your questions. It's Jill on Money. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. Cord is 69 years old and retired. He's got $900,000 in bonds, $350,000 in cash. Wants to know, do I need to be more diversified? Kind of depends. I mean, do you need the money? Are you pulling money from these accounts? I sure would like to have a little bit of a stock position in there, even if it were just a minimal amount, maybe a 10 or 20% position. That would make me happier, Cord. That is, I know, when people are risk averse, they hate hearing that, but it does help you if you get any sort of flash of inflation. It just even a small amount. So, I mean, look, if you're living large and you've got Social Security and pension and you're not touching this money, sure, it's fine. But if you want to, just a little bit of diversification, that would be okay with me too. Carol writes, she's 80 years old. Her son just turned, you ready for this, Mark? 60. He borrowed $3,000 from the student loan program to go to community college, and he dropped out before finishing. He's worked low-paying jobs his whole life. He did send some payments on the loan. The interest gobbled it up. The payback amount, $34,000. I'd like to help him resolve this, but I don't even know where to begin. Let me tell you where to begin. Don't get involved. Do not pay this off for him. And there's no negotiation. There really isn't. You should not pay for this. I don't know, unless you've got a ton of money. That's a terrible story. I don't like that one, Mark. I'm going to pick a new one. How about this one? Robert writes, can you explain the math of the cost of Medicare Parts B and D? That's what Bob wants to know. This is always such a pain in the neck. Here's what you do. You want to see this in black and white. Go to Medicare.gov. The Part B premium is $135.50 a month, which is standard, but it can go up depending on your income. That's the same deal with Medicare Part D. So you are penalized when you have higher income. That may not seem fair, but them's the rules. So go check it out, because a lot of people are often surprised that they have to spend a lot more money on Medicare than they initially thought. It's also a really good reason to convert into a Roth IRA, because a lot of people are whacked with that Medicare extra payment, or they're having their Social Security benefits taxed because of the required minimum distribution is adding to their taxable income. And all these two plans, these big federal plans, key off of your income tax. Stephanie wants to know the best way to use extra money. I'm a regular listener. I want to thank you for explaining important concepts that I would rather not think about. You do this in an accessible way. I've got many questions. I want to distill them into two general ones. Should we be directing our extra money towards paying down debt, a mortgage, or put it into other investments? Ready for this? Do not pay down your mortgage. Yes, put it into other investments. Okay? That's an easy one. The reason is that once you pay down, unless that mortgage is like some 12% mortgage that is left over from 60 years ago, then, you're probably going to make more money with your money. 2, my spouse is a dual national, German and U.S. We're facing terrible headaches with the foreign asset reporting. Oh, it is awful. The laws are targeting super wealthy people stashing money abroad. How can regular Americans with assets overseas cope? Giving up the other nationality is not an option. My aunt just gave up her U.S. citizenship for this reason. How about that, Mark? She's Australian all the way now. It's not. I guess the way to do it is to not have assets abroad. But it is a pain in the neck. Definitely. Ignacio says, I've got a home with equity of $800,000, but I don't have a lot of money in my 401k, just $30,000. I'm 62. What should I do? Sell my home and invest it? I just don't have enough money to cover the expenses of the house. Yeah, you're going to have to sell the house and you're going to downsize. And maybe what you want to consider is before you just pop into another house to buy, maybe you rent for a little bit. That might be something to consider. All right. Mark, time, please. Okay, here we go. Here's from Francis. I've got an investment company that's managing my money. I want to manage my account myself to save fees. Gains are good, though unexpected capital gains have played havoc with my taxes. If I withdraw the initial investment, is it taxable? Well, you can't do that. In other words, you have to basically, if you're going to pull all the money out, then the money it really depends on the type of account. So here's a question. What types of accounts do you have? Are taxes paid each year deductible? No. Are fees deductible? They used to be. They are no longer. Are there tax publications to read or other resources? I'm trying to maximize gains and minimize taxes. Ha, ha, ha. That is funny. Ha, ha, ha. If you want to just basically move the account, you're going to pay the capital gains. Well, first of all, you can move the account as is and then make decisions about being smart about how to reallocate after the fact. So first, why don't you just try to move the account as it's currently invested to a no-load, no-fee house, and then let's go from there. Okay? How about that? It's Jill on Money, and we are just plowing away with these questions. If you would like to get in on the action, ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. When you're on the website, why don't you do this? Sign up for our free weekly newsletter. It's really fun, and it's free. Okay, we'll be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money. Before we finish up the program, want to remind you that we are broadcasting live from the Policy Genius studios. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy insurance. Just go to policygenius.com. I love when I get an easy question for the end of the show. Michael wants to know, what's the best way to get involved in the marijuana stock boom? I want to buy, but I don't know how. Any suggestions? You ready for this? I don't know either. And I'm not sure that anybody really knows. I think, first of all, if you're going to actually buy individual stocks, you better be willing to lose some money. And second, it's a fad. I have no idea. I can't possibly. I don't know how to give you advice on that. Denise writes that she listened to a podcast with a guest who was on something called Facet Wealth. This is a advisory service for people, I think, who are sort of squeezed out of the high end of financial advice, but probably have too much money for the low end. They want advice. Anyway, Denise says, I've got $1.2 million of savings, $900,000 in tax-deferred IRAs, and a solo 401k. We also have 2 single-family investment properties and a primary residence. All combined have about a debt of $450,000 against a market value of $2.4 million. I've got an emergency fund. I'm 56. Husband's 59. I'm wondering, is Facet suited for me, or are they more suited for a young investor just starting out? I love your show. I appreciate your response. Hey, you know what? I think, Denise, that certainly worth talking to these folks. You are kind of in their sweet spot, meaning that this is a firm that was created for advice first and investing second. And so I think it's certainly worth trying the Facet Wealth folks out, see what you think. Before you do that, of course, I encourage you to go to my website, to jillonmoney.com. Go to the resource section, and I have a part that says the questions to ask before you interview or hire a financial advisor. Tell me what you think about those folks at Facet. I think they're pretty darn good myself. And if you've got other questions that come up as a result of the conversation, get back in touch with us. Okay, it's Jill on Money, and thanks again for all of you who listened throughout the whole show. If you missed any part of it, just go to the website, jillonmoney.com. And if you've got a question, send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll see you next week.